Okay, I thought, or I think, this is a topic that's generally seen as a third rail topic. But the truth is that most of us are pretty much in the middle and pretty much in agreement. Right? There's lots of different things that topics like this. Right? Lots of them that you like to the outsider, like, ooh, you can't talk about it. You know, there's the Mikey Williams story, which is from last week. And I know there's some of you who don't know who Mikey Williams is. He had 3 million or so followers on Instagram. He was a basketball sensation, much like he was like the next Zion Williamson. Friday, I believe, he was arrested for 5 counts of assault with a deadly weapon. The depiction of what happened from his attorneys were he was at his house. Some people came in who he hadn't invited there, and there was some sort of verbal altercation. And when they were leaving in some form of self-defense, he fired bullets at their car. Right. So why does this matter? Well, because there's a lot to it. Right. There's we keep throwing money at kids. And here as an influencer, that was, I believe, his own house, like at 18 years old. But there's a reason that we've tried to protect 17, 18-year-olds in the past. And now, obviously, the proliferation of guns. And, man, we're very fortunate that this is the worst thing that happened. God forbid he fires that gun and hits somebody, or somebody shoots back at him, and things could be even worse. But I got to tell you this. Here's a topic which I try and pick up my kids from school as often as I can. And one of my daughters, her name is Grace, and Grace has always been had a very big heart for anyone who she would say would get made fun of at any sort of traditional school, right? And yeah, I guess you would, a naysayer would say, well, she's a bleeding heart liberal. Or she's just somebody who understands that lots of kids go through lots of stuff. And, all you can do is be their friend and be by their side. And, if they're a good person, they're a good person. They're a bad person, they're a bad person. That's really kind of the end of it. But how do we get to this place where transgender women are competing against biological women, and there's some sort of debate about it? Like, again, this is from my daughter's 17 years old. She's a beautiful, smart young woman who has a mind of her own, and she volunteered me. It's like, that's kind of ridiculous, isn't it, Dad? I'm like, yeah. And what it's seen as doing is it's seen as, well, we're protecting trans rights and limit. No, it has nothing to do with your rights. And again, I'm not trying to, I don't care if this is being offensive to you, because I'm sharing my honest thoughts. And I think I'm pretty empathetic towards a lot of different sides of things. I'm a radical centrist. I am not anything that anyone wants to label otherwise. But I mean, let me ask you, Dan Byer, you have a son, so it does, it's not. But I mean, is there a reasonable argument otherwise that I'm trying to find there? Because again, when you and I can tell you, I experienced this. My son is what you'd call a young 14, right? Spring birthday plus super late bloomer. So he won't go to high school until next year. Because like me, he's hopefully going to grow this summer and into next year. And the difference between, when you're in 7th, 8th, middle school boys, especially in sports, it's just, the difference is gigantic in pre and post puberty. Just gigantic. You can't, there's just games, no matter how hard he works, it's really hard for him to compete. Really hard. With kids his own age, I'm not accusing people of the 5 holdback thing or whatever, but on the same token, like we can say the same thing about transgender women versus biological women, can't we? I mean, the results are obvious. When you had the woman who she, as a man, was a very average swimmer, she becomes the best swimmer in women's collegiate swimming, like in 1 year. Like, it's kind of obvious. Am I missing something, Dan, in the argument?
Well,
I'm not trying to rope you into anything
Yeah.
anti-political that you're not comfortable with. I totally get it.
Well, I don't think that I'm the guy to fill in the gaps in a lot of stuff. I would just say that I also just I don't think that it is fair for transgender athletes who have become female to compete in those events. I just biologically it just isn't. It's no contest. I mean, I've played. You're talking about basketball. I remember playing in 8th grade basketball and having to guard a kid that's 6'3" and is going to go and play D1 football. Within 5 years, and I wasn't even close to it. And it was an unfair fight, but kid was in 8th grade, probably played varsity from freshman on. I just think that this is different. I just don't think that. Yeah, I don't.
Here's the hard part about it. Here's the hard part about it. Here's the hard part about it. Like, you're a thoughtful, empathetic human being. Like, in no way are you saying there's no. I've never heard anything hateful come out of your mouth ever, right? Ever. Maybe towards like Cardinal fans. Like, okay, maybe a little bit, right? Right? Or like you're just done with the Aaron Rodgers thing. Like, God, I don't even like the Packers, and even I want to move on from this thing. Got it. But none of this is. But it's just kind of a matter of fact. Like, how did we get to this point where this is? And I'm not trying to make it any sort of political stance, on any of this other stuff. We cover sports on the Doug Gottlieb Show. That's what we do. This is it's a lot like the Mikey Williams thing is about sports, in terms of NIL. And here's a guy who at 14 years old was better than everybody on the planet, and other people passed him. That's part of kind of what you're talking about, or what we've been talking about as well, is some guys mature early, okay? And do they develop and refine and hone those skills, or do they top out when everybody has a friend who, man, at 12 years old, he was the best on earth. And at 16 years old, he was the exact same guy he was at 12 years old, right? Everyone knows that kid in the neighborhood, right? But but this one seems kind of easy, and we're making it really, really hard, and we're making it such a divisive issue. It should not be.
I do think that there is, when it comes to athletes, whether it be men and women, boys and girls, there is a survival of the fittest, the ones that are built for those athletic events. I did not have the size or the strength to do that in my career, or the athletic ability or talent to do that. So like as you move on, there's another 90% of people that aren't making it to the next level that are in that discipline. And so when you're talking about where these athletes are competing, this is the top level of, or near the top level for these women's competitions, collegiate swimming, NCAA, that sort of thing, to just be able to transition and automatically be able to take over and be dominant just doesn't, I don't know, it's not the same as someone who's just like, I swam JV for 2 years, didn't make varsity, and that was the end of my swimming career. That is different than what I think we see of somebody taking over in the, a transgender athlete. Say women's swimming was the example that you used.
Well, here's the and to kind of buttress your argument, it does actually extend to JV and all the way down, right? It's a lot like, in many ways, it's like when steroids was in baseball, right? Because in addition to celebrating guys that succeeded in nefarious ways, think of how many, I talk about this all the time because Matt Holliday is one of my closer friends. Like, his stats, his entire career would look incredibly different if he wasn't not just competing against steroid guys, but if their normal numbers were more on the normal side. Like, you cut all their numbers and normalize them without performance-enhancing drugs. he might be a Hall of Famer, but you kind of go on down the line. How many guys didn't get an opportunity to play because, on down the line in AAA and AA and single A and et cetera? Well, it's the same thing in, you take swimming, you take any of these sports, yes, we're talking about the very top level, but there is the trickle down to it. And, with the fight for Title IX to be, to truly have to be equal, like any opportunity you're giving to someone who's a trans athlete, you're taking away likely from a biological woman she just tried to compete and get herself ready. And yes, maybe it only affects the varsity, but that varsity, there's a trickle down to the JV. There's a trickle down to the freshman squad. There's a trickle down to is it even worth me competing? Because I have no shot if that's who I'm competing against.
Sure. But the point that I was making was, and I'll just use basketball. It's easier to do it that way.
Okay.
A girl who's 4'11" doesn't have as much of a shot of making it to the WNBA as a girl who's 6'4", and those differences occur in sports all the time. Just like, right. As I said, I'm, in 8th grade trying to guard a guy who's going to go and play left tackle in D1 football. And it's just, guess what? I was the biggest kid on my team. He was the biggest kid on his team. So guess who I'm guarding? Like that, like those differences happen in sports. There's a kid that's better than everyone else. The problem that with this in being at the high level is all of these athletes are good. It's the top of the top. It's the 1% likely of them in their sport, and then to have another athlete come in and dominate. That's why I don't think it's the same as someone who just maybe wasn't blessed with the height or the strength or the athletic ability as somebody else who was able to take advantage of that and go have a college career. Not even the spot on a team, but just the survival of the fittest, who makes it and who advances.
Jay Stu, what do you think, bud?
I think it's ridiculous. I think the entire argument's ridiculous, and I think it's the argument for allowing this to happen is not being made by people in sports. It's being made as a political football. It's being made as a reason for everything needs to be equal in every case in our society, or else you are being a bigot or being discriminatory. I honestly have not heard a common sense argument or conversation from people in our industry, which is the sports industry, that is in support of this. So I think if you know sports, if you know the difference in biology, and if you grew up playing sports, you know how ridiculous this is. Serena Williams, and I'm guessing she regrets saying it, but she was the one who said, didn't she say that she would be like the 70th best person, or even worse if she played in men's tennis? Like, to me, that should speak volumes. You have
look. There's a reason that we ban performance enhancers, because they increase your level of testosterone, right? That's what we do. And and you could say, well, you go through therapy for a year and whatever, and it's your levels are lowered. Like, okay, but your body has been built and constructed completely differently. And again, this is like this is not a show talking about whether you should or should not allow your child to change genders and what age. Like, I'm not even getting into that. And I do respect that once you get to be an adult, like if you're willing to go through that step, like that's a drastic step. And, you're obviously feeling something emotionally that, like, I actually have an amount of respect for people who are willing and putting themselves out there. Because can you imagine the conversation you have with your parents, with your loved ones, about what you've always, some may support you, some may not, some may privately not, right? So there's an amount of bravery I completely understand. But I'm with how Dan led it. This is what I'm about in all sport. I'm about being fair, right? It's like when I saw last night with the Warriors, I saw Steph Curry shoot a three, and I think it was Alex Len steps into him. That's a dangerous play, and it's unfair to not make that call, right? That's the Jaja Pachulia play, right? You can't, you got to protect the shooter so he can land. I absolutely did not. Like, I thought Draymond that was a bad deal, a bad whistle. I don't think there should have been a call. Definitely shouldn't have been ejected. And I know there's some of his past and theatrics that led to that happening. But it's not because I'm a Warriors fan or thought the Warriors could win the championship. It's just, I just want a fair game. And whoever makes more baskets in a fair game, that's who I want. That's my whole thing. When people say, well, you're all about efficiency. No, I just want fair sports. And I just don't think it's fair. And I don't think anybody, like you said, Jason, like I haven't heard a reasonable argument that tells that somehow says, hey, this is the fair thing to do to the greatest number of people. I understand that's part of it is we got to try and protect everybody's right. It is not your right to compete, to what Dan said, at high level sports just because there are other factors involved in this. Anyway, we went there and we didn't raise our voices and yell. Although
I
Jason
did kind of, I did a little bit.
John, you want to hop in on this? Or are you good?
I'm good.
Okay. I mean, let me ask you though. Okay, your daughter plays softball.
She did. She's not playing this season though.
Okay, let's say, let's say she decides to come back and she's playing. She plays in college. Is it fair for her to compete against a trans woman?
Off the top of my head, I would say no.
Yeah. And
and by the way, lots and now from what I've seen, just on general news type of stuff, Doug, it seems to be that the majority of women, and I'm not speaking for all women, but the majority that I've seen are also against that. Like, there's a big push for just the women saying, "Hey, look, we've worked our whole life to get to this point, and we're being, all of a sudden in 1 week we're like knocked out of our, qualifying, we're knocked out of playoffs and just stuff like that." So it's not just men saying this or people against whatever you want to say. People are against. It's actually like, hey, I'm a girl and I've been working my whole life to get to the Olympics or whatever, and now I'm just being passed up in like a month by somebody. So
now, didn't Megan Rapinoe and another athlete come out in support of
I think so.
Yeah. 40 professional athletes came out asking to drop the trans ban, and Megan Rapinoe's one of them. Megan Rapinoe, I think Sue Bird, and a couple others. But I mean, like, okay, so what happens when, a soccer player chooses to have surgery, chooses, says, I want to identify as a woman, I want to have a sex change, which we say, we don't even say sex change anymore, right? We say gender reassignment, right? As gender reassignment surgery, and then like now they're competing against you. Like, how is that going to sit with you? I don't actually think this is that controversial. I think, Jason, what you said was the right one, which is this is made to be controversial. It's really, really not.